The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Kelsey LaBelle, the Senior Marketing Communications Manager here at DomainTools, and I'm very excited to welcome you to today's webinar, Making Threat Intelligence Actionable with DomainTools and Bandura Cyber. Our speakers today will be Nathan Staunton, Director of Business Development here at DomainTools, and then John Cardani Trollinger. He's the Product Marketing Manager at Bandura Cyber. A few housekeeping items here before we get started. So all attendees are in listen-only mode, but please feel free to ask questions at any time during the webinar. Simply type your question into the aptly named questions panel in the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the session. And of course, if we don't get to your question live on air, we'll be sure to follow up with you after the fact. We're also going to be recording the webinar, and we'll make that available to you via email. And you'll notice in the handout section that we do have the slides, so feel free to download those. We'll also be emailing them to you after the fact. If you're on Twitter, feel free to follow along at #DTWebinar and join the conversation. CPE credit with ISE Squared is available to all attendees, so follow up with us after the webinar if you're interested. And lastly, John and Nathan both wanted you all to know that this webinar is sponsored by Coffee and Caffeine. So we're going to have some fun and just a little bit more about our speakers. Nathan is the Director of Business Development, and he manages DomainTools' global OEM and MSSP presence. He carries 11 years of enterprise security experience, providing consulting and strategic support to the largest commercial, DoD, federal civilian, and intelligence community programs. When he's not helping make the internet safer, Nathan loves exploring the Pacific Northwest with his fiance and 2 dogs. And a little bit more about John. With more than 20 years of cybersecurity industry experience, John is responsible for product marketing at Bandura Cyber. John is a storyteller at heart and believes very strongly in cybersecurity as a means of protecting our way of life. He brings his experience, perspective, and focus to Bandura Cyber by helping organizations of all sizes understand how they can make threat intelligence actionable to protect their networks. So without further ado, take it away, Nathan.
All right, Kelsey, thanks so much for the kind introduction. I've never sounded more important. And thanks to everyone who has made the time to join us today. John and I are certainly excited to share our insights and hope that you'll find at least some of them valuable and perhaps thought-provoking. To begin, I want to share a framework for today's discussion. The topic du jour is threat intelligence. And so to begin, we'll briefly address how we define, classify, and produce threat intelligence. From there, John and I want to share some of the common challenges, trends, and best practices that we've observed across hundreds of engagements with our customers' threat intel teams. We'll spend some time introducing the capabilities that both DomainTools and Bandura offer to support this use case, and wrap up by presenting some real-world examples of how we've partnered to mitigate recent COVID-19 related threats. At the end, we'll certainly save time to field and answer your questions as well. Perhaps just as importantly as what we plan to cover today is what we won't. And I'll introduce John to explain. John?
Hey, thanks, Nathan, and thanks, Kelsey. Again, I also feel very important from that introduction. So I wanted to cover what we're not going to cover because we want to be, respectful of your time. We're not going to use catchphrases like solving complex challenges in a complex world. And I'm going to try really hard to not say in these unprecedented times. I have $1 to go in a tip jar anytime that happens. We're not going to talk about how expensive a data breach is or the what ifs if you get audited. And I don't have a slide that shows the scarcity of security talent. I mean, how many times have you seen that slide in the past, week of presentations you've seen, or any neat graphic that tells you once again that you don't have any money to do the projects you got planned? And finally, nowhere in this deck is there one of those toxic icons or nuclear icons, or a picture of a hacker in a hoodie. Come to think of it, I don't think we have any anonymous masks either. So with that said, let's jump into the things we are going to talk about. Nathan, why don't you start off by explaining a little bit about threat intelligence?
Perfect, John. Let's go ahead and dive in. As promised, we want to establish a baseline for what we mean when we refer to threat intelligence and set the table for today's discussion. Gartner has a very thorough definition that I've shared here. If you feel so inclined, you can certainly read that. I prefer a more simple one that I've borrowed from my friends in the intelligence community. They define threat intelligence as specialized information that is specific, relevant, actionable, and designed to position them, quote, left of boom. It's a term I'm sure many of you have heard before. Quite literally, they mean getting ahead of or preventing kinetic attacks and other undesirable events. Our boom in the cyber threat intelligence space is certainly different, but I think the sentiment and definition still rings true. As I'm sure many of you are keenly aware, there are different types or layers of threat intelligence, each with a different purpose that targets a different stakeholder audience. Strategic intelligence is designed for executive consumption. It provides a high-level overview of the threat landscape, adversary motives, events, trends, and status on the geopolitical climate. Its purpose is really to provide context for strategic decision-making. Operational intelligence is more targeted. It more thoroughly outlines adversarial capabilities, infrastructure, campaigns, and their observed TTPs. Operational intel enables technical practitioners to better target, respond to, and mitigate threats they encounter across their day-to-day security operations. Last but not least, there's tactical intelligence, which provides the most granular view of the threat landscape. It's really designed or delivered, I should say, as machine-readable lists of indicators that integrate into your defensive security systems. Things like a firewall, IPS, IDS, SIM, TIP, SOAR, or endpoint detection response solution. And we're not even 5 minutes in, and someone out there has already won security buzzword bingo. So sorry about that. But anyways, for the purpose of today's conversation, when we talk about threat intelligence, we're principally going to be referring to tactical as well as operational intelligence. And that's simply because this is where our organizations operate in the space and where we can add some value. The very last point to briefly address before we transition into some of the challenges that we're observing is just a quick overview of the threat intel lifecycle. Again, I'm sure this is recap for most of you, but for those who are first seeing this, the entire process is fairly simple, and we won't dive into deep detail, but everything begins with defining your requirements. If you haven't already, you've got to be asking yourselves, what's my surface area for attack? What's my risk tolerance? What's my infrastructure footprint look like, and how are my users interacting with it? What are my crown jewels, and where do they live? Answers to these types of questions will help define that mission. Once the mission's established, the real challenge is for threat intel teams to gain the visibility they need to what's happening in the world beyond their firewalls. At the end of the day, the most intelligent operations are the ones built on top of the most relevant and authoritative data sources. Data is really king. And so the collection, processing of that is incredibly important to the threat intel lifecycle. Once you've sourced all that data, put it together, really that's where the rubber meets the road, and you can start producing the threat intelligence that meets the needs of your stakeholders. With that quick overview out of the way, let's dive into what we're learning from actual client engagements. John, can you set the table for us here?
Yeah, sure. So we can sort of, I guess, bucketize these challenges into three functional aspects: data challenges, process challenges, and infrastructure challenges. And actually, you hinted it over me, but as DomainTools is the expert in data, Nathan, why don't you start us off by sharing some of the data challenges as they relate to threat intelligence?
Sure, happy to do that. I prefaced this earlier when I emphasized the importance of quality data. One of the more common challenges that I encounter is actually a data deficit. And I can hear some of you thinking out there, data deficit, Nathan, I'm drowning in more log, security event, and threat intel feed data than I can possibly manage. And I hear you, and we'll certainly address that as well. But I still consistently encounter organizations that don't have the visibility they need to relevant threat data. And where that exists is obviously dependent on your mission, but data deficit is still a very real issue. We operate in the DNS space and have some obviously capability there, but frequently encounter organizations pursuing dark or deep web data, social media sites, for example, for the visibility they need to answer the questions that they need to for their threat intel practice. Ultimately, organizations will struggle to do threat intelligence well if they aren't drawing from rich and comprehensive data sources that, again, align with their mission. Another challenge that we see is the reality that tactical intelligence just has a short shelf life. In the DNS, for example, bad actors are continually evolving their attack infrastructure. Increasingly, we're seeing campaigns measured in minutes, hours, and days rather than days, weeks, or months. This demands that the velocity of our data and processes is accelerated to keep pace. And this dovetails nicely with the third and final challenge that I'll address from a data perspective, which is that many organizations have yet to embrace predictive analytics. I'll speak more to this in a bit, but in short, many teams are seemingly overly reliant on tactical intelligence feeds of known bad indicators and lack the visibility to the high-risk emerging threats that perhaps pose the greatest risks to their organizations. John, I know you have some unique insights here as well. What have you observed to be some of the biggest data challenges in the space?
Well, you kind of summed it up a little bit there when you said, embracing proactive threat data sources, because we've seen a lot of that as well. And part of that reason is the inability to manage and orchestrate threat intelligence. When you look at, multiple sources that are coming in and the need to correlate it in a timely manner, especially from the time it's received to the time it's configured or added to the security stack in whatever way, a customer, regardless of size, is doing that. And especially when you talk about that at scale. So there are aspects of this data challenge that are going to affect, like I said, organizations of all sizes. And that really also, when I say sizes, I really mean more maturity levels. And there will be definitely challenges specific to where an organization is on its, shall we call it, threat intelligence journey. So let me give you an example. So there are some organizations that may be new to threat intelligence, perhaps they're smaller, that are looking for a turnkey solution. So one where the threat intelligence would be provided to them from multiple sources within one solution. And then there are more mature organizations that may have a few sources of threat intelligence, industry specific. They may purchase some. They're looking for a solution that will take action. I need something to do with these sources of threat intelligence, some way to, aggregate, integrate, and take action on it. And then finally, there are very sophisticated organizations that are already well invested and may have a mature threat intelligence practice, and they're looking for additional control within their security practice and across their security stack. And that's kind of what we see from a maturity level as far as challenges facing customers within data. But let's also talk, because that's actually very related to process challenges. So we just went over threat intelligence can prevent challenges to an organization when it comes to managing threat intelligence data. Now, when you compare that to the size of organization and you relate it to a process challenges, in most cases, they're going to go hand in hand. So for example, once an organization receives threat intelligence from its sources, is there a process in place to aggregate, correlate, and integrate it into their security practice? And that can be a pretty big chore for most organizations, right? Especially those who are getting their threat intelligence from many different sources. Those threat intelligence feeds are being updated also at very regular timeframes per threat intelligence source. So for example, if there's a dedicated, is there a dedicated resource managing these feeds? And then let's say you are a mature, sophisticated organization that not only has threat intelligence, but let's say you also have deployed a threat intelligence platform. Does it work nicely with your SIEM or your firewall? How automated is it really? When you take into account these manual linkages and the time required to tune and update. So these are the challenges most organizations face when it comes to putting threat intelligence into practice through our process. And then the final bucket of the threat intelligence challenges relates to infrastructure, the solutions and devices within your security architecture. So most organizations have, a security infrastructure that's built using traditional security solutions and devices. That's fine. And we all know, that a defense in depth strategy is still the best approach. The truth is, however, that traditional security infrastructure was never meant to be used to effectively operationalize threat intelligence. So for example, while next-gen firewalls do allow for threat intelligence to be added to and configured into the device, there are limitations on the amount of threat intelligence that can be added and then blocked in line before performance degradation becomes an issue. And what's more, as we mentioned earlier, let's say your organization is mature enough to have deployed a tip, you have a great SIEM in place, as well as your traditional security solutions, how well do they work together holistically or in an automated way? So for example, as Nathan talked about earlier, once you have these proactive protections taking place, for that traffic that does get through, is there a feedback loop? So that there's a way to look deeper into the questionable data that gets through, identify it as malicious, correlate it with associated malicious activity, and then deploy new protections reactively to the devices, in the network, so that they can then protect proactively for new traffic that's deemed malicious. And that feedback loop is really a critical component of a well-oiled security practice. Would you like to add anything, Nathan?
Absolutely, thanks, John. I think you nailed it. Like you, we see a lot of the process and infrastructure challenges as tightly intertwined. Obviously, there's overlap in across all of these buckets, if you will. We certainly see workflow automation and technology integrations as key drivers for efficiency and success in the engagements that we have with our clients. And our job ultimately as threat intel professionals is to separate the signal from the noise and deliver the high confidence answers that the business needs. And so, we know it's a process that requires ongoing tuning, care and feeding, and the concept you introduced of that feedback loop certainly resonates with me. So now that we've outlined a few of the challenges, we kind of want to talk a little bit about how DomainTools and Bandura Cyber are positioned to support you with the work that you need to do. And certainly we want to try to make this not as kind of salesy as it otherwise could be, but try to have some callbacks to the challenges we've outlined as well, and maybe get you thinking a little bit about where we fit and how we can help, while also acknowledging that we're not the only solutions you're going to need to do threat intelligence well. But anyways, let's start with DomainTools and kind of who we are and where we fit for those who are unfamiliar. DomainTools has been in business for the last 2 decades, and in that time, we're recognized for having amassed the world's leading database of domain ownership and DNS infrastructure information. We've lovingly dubbed this infrastructure intelligence. Our infrastructure intelligence is comprised of WHOIS records, comprehensive hosting infrastructure attributes, web crawl data, and our domain risk scoring. The most important takeaway here is that we're not just collecting all of these data elements, we're also mapping all of the interconnections between them. So we can tell you what actors are tied to what infrastructure, tied to what campaigns. These connections are things that we're mapping across the entire internet at scale every single day. And the connections that we're surfacing help the threat intelligence teams that we support really do a great job of mitigating risk, profiling your adversaries, and cultivating that meaningful operational intelligence. We address kind of the value of quality data and what it can mean for an organization. And DomainTools really strives to deliver this in spades. We know about more than 350 million currently registered domains, which is the best coverage of this you'll find anywhere in the world. Every day, we're continually updating our data set, making near 200,000 domain observations every second as an organization, and pulling in all the newly registered and newly discovered domains. And our 20-year historical repository of information and passive DNS data is pretty much unrivaled in the space. And ends up being a very valuable capability for InfoSec professionals, including threat intel analysts. The last capability that I want to share builds upon the extent of our data to really help you profile risk in new and interesting ways. And that's our domain risk score, something you may have heard us talking about recently. We'll outline an example of this through kind of a real world look at a domain. If you can see in the top left of my screen is OWA-Office 3365. It's an indicator that we picked up through a client engagement not long ago. Through the magic of PowerPoint here, I'll kind of drill in. You'll see I have a screenshot from the Iris Investigations platform, and this is one of our capabilities you can leverage. We'll kind of set that aside and just talk about the scoring though. At a high level, what we're doing with our risk scoring is designing the ability to, or delivering the ability, I should say, to quantify the level of a risk associated with any and all internet domains. Every day we're updating and delivering 4 unique scores for phishing, malware, spam, and blacklist proximity to help you make informed decisions. Our first and oldest score is blacklist proximity. This is something that's existed for years at DomainTools. Every day we're ingesting a number of commercial and open source blacklists. And if a domain exists on those blacklists, we're immediately scoring it as 100. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. You immediately get the highest score possible. If it's not on a blacklist, as this domain is not, I guess I should say, then we'll draw on our deep understanding of the infrastructure connections that we observe to inform a proximity or guilt by association score. And so you can see here that I've manually pivoted off of the host IP and registrant organization info to find some additional high-risk infrastructure that's closely correlated with the domain in question. And in particular, the hundreds you see under the registrant organization pivot, which are blacklisted, have helped us arrive at this proximity score of 80, which lands in that 70 plus range in our scoring, which we consider to be very high risk and actionable. Proximity provides really valuable context, and it's something we're obviously doing every single day at scale on your behalf, programmatically, so you can not have to do what I've done manually here. But the limitation with this capability, as with many others that our customers are ingesting, is that it's based on trailing indicators. The score that's informed is reliant on bad actors already having been caught in the wild doing bad things. Somebody has to have already been burned in order for us to be able to provide that value. And so we wanted to create a capability that helps solve for that. And so the other component to our risk scoring is what we call threat profile. This is listed as our phishing, malware, and spam scores. And these are powered by machine learning classifiers that our data science team have built and trained for the last 4 or 5 years now. For those of you who are familiar with the Tom Cruise movie Minority Report, hopefully this will resonate. These scores are essentially our precogs in the tank that are future predicting crimes before they occur. It's a complex engine that we won't fully dive into in deep detail, but essentially what we're doing is looking at the intrinsic properties of every single domain and their infrastructure footprints from the moment those domains are registered and come into our view, and every day thereafter. We've watched the trajectory that tens of millions of domains have followed on their path historically to be blacklisted for spam, phishing, and malware. And so we have an understanding of kind of, to mix my metaphors, whether or not domains are following a path to the light side or the dark side of the force. And we adjust our scores accordingly. Ultimately, our deliverable with risk score is us surfacing the highest overall composite of the 4 scores, along with the classification and some supporting evidence. This is, again, a predictive and proactive capability that augments the trailing classifier capability with proximity, and again, is designed to help organizations identify and act on the highest risk indicators hopefully and often before they are actually weaponized and can cause harm. This risk scoring capability is important to talk about because it's what powers our integration with Bandura's threat intelligence firewall. John, do you want to walk us through how you operationalize this data inside of your platform?
Absolutely. So now you have, let's sort of take it from what Nathan just showed you, right? So now you have this rich, contextual, comprehensive, and scored threat intelligence. The next sort of natural question is, what do I do with it, right? Do you have a tip deployed, or is it coming directly into your security practice? Are you faced with the data process and infrastructure challenges we just identified earlier? Pardon me. There we go. This is where the Bandura Cyber Threat Intelligence Platform comes in. The Bandura Cyber Threat Intelligence Platform is a turnkey solution that aggregates and integrates threat intelligence in the cloud and then makes it actionable by blocking known bad traffic before it hits your network. It can be quickly installed most times in less than 20 minutes and is easily deployed and managed from anywhere. So that all sounds really great, right? That's my nice little marketing blurb. So what does that actually look like? So our platform consists of two components: a cloud-based, we call it the Actionable threat intelligence engine, and an on-prem threat intelligence firewall. So the Actionable threat intelligence engine, or the ATI, is where the aggregation and integration takes place. The ATI connects data sources in real time from any source, including commercial, government, if you have any industry-specific ISACs or ISO threat feeds coming in, your tips, your SOARs, your SIMs, and it includes 30 million threat indicators out of box with a standard subscription. Now, in addition to this, as part of our enterprise subscription, we offer a DomainTools threat intelligence blacklist that includes all of the malicious domains that have been researched, identified, and investigated by DomainTools experts, and then automatically updated as new domains are identified. And these are then pushed down to your threat intelligence firewall, where it's made actionable by blocking up to 150 million threat indicators at line speed before they hit your network and your existing security controls. So I'm sure you can see the value of threat intelligence driven protection. Some of these are listed on this slide. And rather than me going through all of them and listing them individually, let me put it into perspective. So earlier, we talked about the challenges that are facing organizations, and among those were the challenges in operationalizing threat intelligence. What do I do with it? How to take action on it? And together with DomainTools, that's exactly what we provide: expertly delivered threat intelligence, as well as industry-specific threat feeds, automatically ingested and correlated, as well as threat intelligence from your existing traditional security infrastructure, then delivered onto a threat intelligence firewall that takes action on that threat intelligence and blocks known bad IPs and domains before they hit your network. So that sounds good, but let's put it into a use case that makes sense and sort of tie it back to some of our challenges from earlier. This is a perfect, I'll talk about a use case that's an example of that proactive and reactive feedback loop we talked about earlier. So let's say you have both DomainTools and the Bandura Cyber Threat Intelligence Firewall platform. So you are already blocking 30 million threat indicators that come standard out of the box, but you've also enabled DomainTools' entire enterprise subscription list. And that protection gives you an additional 25 million plus malicious domains that you're blocking from. That's your proactive protection. Traffic comes in, it's deemed malicious, IP or domain, it blocks it before it ever gets to the firewall. So the next gen firewall is then doing what it's meant to do, going deeper into application traffic to identify malicious traffic, block it, and then send good traffic on. You also have a SIEM that's correlating alerts. Now, let's say something potentially malicious is alerted on your SIEM, and then using the IRIS database, you look it up, that what Nathan just showed, and you see that this malicious domain using the proximity score correlates to 5 IP addresses. You can then take those 5 IP addresses, go back into your threat intelligence firewall platform, and very easily add these IP addresses to a custom blacklist, and thereby achieve reactive protection. And holistically, this all offers a well-oiled cybersecurity feedback loop and security practice. You might say we're a firewall for a firewall, right? So that's good because, you know, oh, I went too far. Let me go back. We are complementary to one another. And the difference being in the protection perspective that we're providing. So for example, if you know you want to block known bad IPs and domains, and you know that these lists number in the hundreds of millions, then you're also probably aware of the limitations of your next generation firewall. Trying to add unique and third-party generated indicators is going to be very labor and performance intensive, whereas the Bandura Cyber Threat Intelligence Firewall platform takes the burden off of the next-gen firewall by eliminating IP and domain IOCs before that traffic even gets to the next-generation firewall. So it can do what it was meant to do, like I mentioned before, deep packet and application inspection. And that improves both the security of the network as well as the performance of your next-generation firewall. So let's take a look at an example of how DomainTools and Bandura Cyber are working together to solve a very real world scenario. Nathan, why don't you share a little bit about the DomainTools COVID-19 specific blacklist?
Yeah, happy to, John. So this is something we're, I dare say, very proud of as an organization. What we continually see is that bad actors are incredibly opportunistic, as we're all keenly aware, and will jump on any opportunity that presents itself to, you know, cause harm in the world and trick and phish folks. And so, as we've seen with other natural disasters, other major global events, there's been a massive influx of newly registered domains that are essentially targeting victims from a COVID-19 perspective. And so we're really excited to serve our mission of making the internet safer by offering this free list of intelligence, which you can go right now to our website, DomainTools.com, and download yourselves. Or as John will explain in a minute, operationalize this through your existing threat intelligence firewall to be able to get visibility to what we're producing here. And so really quickly, let me touch on what that is. We have a number of capabilities at DomainTools, but drawing from our ability to suck up all newly registered and discovered domains, and then also to be able to find typo variations and exact matches of any given term that we want across that data set, we first identified a massive list of all newly registered domains that were leveraging specific COVID-19 related terms and permutations of those terms. From there, we validated that those domains were registered recently within a window of relevancy for this use case. And from there, applied our DomainTools risk scoring as we do for every given domain on the internet. Ultimately, what we've curated is a list of very specific, relevant, right, and actionable indicators that any organization can leverage as they see fit. And really, again, as I'm sure we may discuss further at some point, the process of determining what is actionable for you as an organization to block and what is something you may just want to kind of watch list is something you can certainly determine. And depending on your capabilities, you can, I guess that will dictate how much of this you can kind of proactively integrate into your security posture. But irregardless of what that looks like, our goal is to try to provide the visibility to this area of emerging risk so that any and every organization that wants to take advantage of this data can certainly do that. And so again, it's something we're very proud of. It's something you can go and download yourselves right now if you haven't already from DomainTools. And we hope you'll find it incredibly valuable. John, I know you have obviously integrated this into the Bandura threat intelligence firewall. Can you talk a little bit about how that's manifested?
Yep, absolutely. So
Awesome.
I mean, like he just said, I don't have to repeat it again. I guess I do. But we have two, both of those. So we have two lists that are this COVID-19 threat list, and we've separated them based off of the risk score. So there's a COVID-19 domain tools 99 that's related domains with a risk score of 99 and higher, as Nathan had shown earlier how that was determined. And that list currently contains about 50,000 domains. We have another list that's at 70, a risk score of 70 and higher. And that's about 90,000 domains in that list. Both of these can easily be enabled depending on what risk level you want to block within your network. What we suggest is what Nathan just mentioned before, and that is, to start, we suggest 99 and higher as a blacklist, and then 70 and higher to begin with as more of a watch list. And like Nathan mentioned, that's a perfect example of domain tools and Bandura Cyber working together to deliver timely protections as a free service. As I mentioned before, we also offer a full domain tools threat feed as part of our enterprise subscription. And that includes over 25 million domains that are automatically updated into your threat intelligence, into the threat intelligence firewall platform, and then down to your threat intelligence firewall. So I think we've given a few examples of how domain tools and Bandura Cyber help our customers, and hopefully you, solve your threat intelligence challenges as they relate to the data, process, and infrastructure challenges you face on a daily basis, and how making threat intelligence actionable can add threat intelligence driven protection onto your network. And with that, thank you very much for your time. I think we can, Nathan, hand it back to Kelsey for open it up for questions.
Perfect.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you both for that wonderful presentation, Nathan and John. And as John mentioned, we're now going to be addressing any questions, and feel free to use that questions panel. A few of them have already come in, so I'll go ahead and start sharing those with Nathan and John now. So I'm going to have Nathan answer this first question, which is, can the domain tools scoring and profiling be tailored to a specific organization, business, and location, since all entities don't necessarily have the same identified risk or overall threat, or from overall threat?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And unfortunately, I wish I had a little bit better answer to give you. The short answer is no. And the purpose is for that is it's complicated enough for us to conduct the scoring and to continually update that across the billions of unique data points and hundreds of millions of domains that we've got on a daily basis. And so introducing additional variables as one-offs for customer needs ends up becoming a really large lift for us. It may be something in the future that we enable in various ways throughout our platform so that organizations can more granularly determine kind of how, what feeds into their output. But today we're trying to provide the most coverage we can across the most common threats specific to domains, and do so in a way that's predictive and proactive in nature. And as such, really there's at least from my view, a limited number of variables that we can really look at and analyze on a daily basis to arrive at those answers. And I think we're doing a really good job of pulling those in and making those considerations on your behalf. That said, it's a great question, and I'd certainly be excited to take it offline, because I think there's ways that, if you understand how that score is put together and also have a workflow around that you can certainly arrive at some level of customization as well with the outputs that we can help cultivate. So great question. I hope I answered.
That is a great question, Nathan. I actually have a little bit more to add to that. From the Bandura Cyber threat intelligence platform perspective, we do have on our threat lists the ability to go in and toggle you can go the sort of threat list scoring that you want to block. So there's a lot more customization in there per threat list, and per type of, traffic that's coming through. We could definitely talk more to that. If you want to contact us again, like Nathan said, afterwards, we'd be happy to do a demo of that as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, John. I should have, clarified. You can definitely kind of range the different scores and action off that appropriately. Just the underlying mechanism that drives the scoring, unfortunately, is kind of a closed box for us right now. Thanks for the question.
Thank you both. Another question that came in that's also around risk score is, you talked about the value of predictive analytics and risk scoring. How should security teams balance these capabilities against their sources of known bad indicators, especially as we're working to avoid false positives? So I think this is probably relevant for both of you, but Nathan, do you want to give it a first shot? And then John, if you have anything to add, we'll go from there.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Nathan, you take that first for sure.
Yeah, this is certainly a question we encounter regularly. We fully recognize that organizations have, alert fatigue and are continually trying to, in many cases, keep up with already a large number of indicators from the reactive sources, or trailing indicators, as I call them, of threats that they're ingesting into their practice. And so when you start introducing predictive analytics and bringing in sort of predict the future type capabilities, which, as any data science practitioner who's worth their weight will tell you, it's an imperfect science. And we're certainly happy to stand up behind the quality of our F scores and our level of accuracy and future predicting or forecasting malintent. But the reality is that at the end of the day, you as an organization have to determine what your, again, risk profile looks like, where you draw the line with the data that you're pulling in that's predictive and proactive, to say, first, do I understand how these things are derived? Do I trust that process? Do those outputs align with my goals as an organization? But then, for example, our threat feeds, our APIs can deliver scores from 0 to 100. And we say 70 plus is high risk, but some organizations threshold that higher. They say, I'm really only going to proactively block or care about the 80 or 90 plus, or look at scenarios where multiple of the 4 scores that DomainTools provides me are high at the same time versus just one indicator. So there's definitely a process to determine kind of what your tolerance is and how you want to action off of what you're providing. But we certainly think and have seen validation that the additional work you have to do to filter that out is well worth the ability to be able to catch proactively very high risk things that the reactive world just has never seen or blocked yet. So hopefully that answers that question. John, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you kind of covered it just philosophically. I mean, if we were to look at the device itself, you determine the level you want to, let's say, speaking specifically of DomainTools, or let's talk about, you have multiple feeds coming in and you've determined what they are. Our engineering team does a really great job of normalizing and determining sort of dupes on threat lists. But at the end of the day, there's also this really great graph that I have purposely not read. But if somebody has a question, I will go read it and find an answer for you. It says sort of like the decision tree to how things are blocked. But at the end of the day, if it's, if you've gone in and configured what level you want to block IPs and domains off of what list, it's going to block them. And the alert you're going to get is really just going to see this was malicious. You've deemed it as malicious and it was blocked. I mean, that answers the question for, alerts and determining, risk scores and are you blocking, bad traffic. I think, did I answer that question? Yes? No?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. And we have a few questions, but we've actually hit our time. So I want to be respectful of everyone's day. So again, if we didn't get to your questions during the live webinar, we will be following up with you over email. But I want to thank Nathan and John for their excellent presentation and their willingness to answer those questions. Feel free to look out for some future DomainTools webinars and Bandura as well. I know they have some great content on their site. and will be doing their own webinars here in the future as well. So feel free to keep an eye on both DomainTools and Bandura. Another quick reminder, if you're trying to keep up to date with weekly news in the security space, feel free to tune into Breaking Badness, which comes out every Wednesday at 9 a.m. And you can find that at domaintools.com/resources/podcast. There will be a lot of puns though, so I do want to give you a heads up of that. So prepare
Breaking
yourselves.
Badness is not. Yeah.
Yes, shout out to Russ at Domain Tools for coming up with that name. Very funny, very well done. With that, I just want to thank everybody for your time. I hope everyone is safe and well. And I'll do my best not to have to put money in the jar. I almost said it, John, but I'm going to censor myself. So I hope everyone has a great day, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars.
Thanks everyone.
Okay, bye.